basis of the AR4, we know that climate change, in the absence of mitigation policies, would in all likelihood lead to 1. Possible disappearance of sea ice by the latter part of the 21st century. 2. Increase in frequency of hot extremes, heat waves and heavy precipitation. 3. Increase in tropical cyclone intensity. 4. Decrease in water resources due to climate change in many semi-arid areas such as the Mediterranean basin, western United States, southern Africa and northeastern Brazil. 5. Possible elimination of the Greenland ice sheet and a resulting contribution to sea level rise of about 7 meters. Without mitigation, future temperatures in Greenland would compare with levels estimated for 125,000 years ago, when paleoclimate information suggests 4 to 6 meters of sea level rise. 6. Approximately 20 to 30% of species assessed so far being at increased risk of extinction if increases in global average warming exceed 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. May I mention that climate change is expected to exacerbate current stresses on water resources from population growth and economic and land use change, including urbanization. Available research suggests a significant future increase in heavy rainfall events in many regions, including some in which the mean rainfall is projected to decrease. The resulting flood risk poses challenges to society, physical infrastructure, and water quality. It is likely that 20% of the world population, which as a fraction could exceed 2 billion people, will live in areas where river flood potential could increase by the 2080s. In Africa, by 2020, between 75 and 250 million people are projected to be exposed to water stress due to climate change. And in some countries on that continent, yields from rain-fed agriculture could be reduced by up to 50%. Another area facing serious impacts of climate change are the oceans, where the uptake of anthropogenic carbon since 1750 has led to the ocean becoming more acidic, with an average decrease in pH of 0.1 units. Increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations lead to further acidification, the consequences of which could be serious for all forms of marine organisms. Societies must now respond to climate change by adapting to its impacts and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. There are viable adaptation options that can be implemented in several sectors at low cost and/or with high benefit-cost ratios. Also, empirical research suggests that higher benefit-cost ratios can be achieved by implementing some adaptation measures at an early stage compared to long-lived infrastructure at a later date. Based on this reality, this conference must put in place measures for financing adaptation projects in some of the most vulnerable regions in the world. This conference must also lead to urgent initiation of large-scale mitigation actions. As the UNFCCC lays down, this must involve action in the developed countries because the developed country parties must take the lead in combating climate change and the adverse effects thereof. Mitigation of emissions is essential because the IPCC has assessed its costs to be modest. To limit average temperature increase at 2 degrees to 2.4 degrees Celsius, the cost of mitigation by 2030 would not exceed 3% of the global GDP. In other words, the so-called prosperity expected in 2030 would be postponed by just a few months. Further, mitigation carries many co-benefits, such as lower levels of air pollution and associated health benefits, higher energy security, larger employment, and stable agricultural production, as well as greater food security. It is gratifying that the G8 leaders have recognized the broad scientific view of limiting increase in global average temperature to 2 degrees Celsius. But we have clearly specified in the AR4 that if temperature increase is to be limited to between 2 and 2.4 degrees Celsius, global emissions must peak no later than 2015. That is barely 6 years from now. and some may even question the goal of 2 degrees Celsius as a ceiling, because this would lead to sea level rise on account of thermal expansion alone of 0.4 to 1.4 meters. This increase, added to the effect of melting of snow and ice across the globe, could submerge several small island states and Bangladesh. There is now adequate scientific and technological experience to show that there are a wide variety of national policies and instruments available to governments to create the incentives for mitigation action. There is no better real-life laboratory in this field to learn from than our host country, Denmark. Through a series of actions and enlightened policies, Denmark has brought about a revolution in wind energy technology and its deployment. Modern Danish wind turbines are now able to produce almost 100 times as much electricity as the first wind turbines that were manufactured in 1980. Based on the experience of Denmark and other countries like Germany, it would be correct to assume that a move to renewable sources of energy would prove that employment generation would take place with enhanced economic output. If we look at the example of Denmark, global sales of Danish wind manufacturers have grown from 200 megawatts a year to 3,600 megawatts a year over the last decade. The world has benefited, therefore, from technology that is economically attractive and state-of-the-art, while Denmark has generated jobs and revenues in this sector. The evidence is now overwhelming that the world would benefit greatly from early action, and that delay would only lead to costs in economic and human terms that would become progressively high. The IPCC has been able to provide substantial evidence through its assessments that science provides us with a basis for undertaking changes that this conference must urgently initiate. Given the wide-ranging nature of change that is likely to be taken in hand, some naturally find it inconvenient to accept its inevitability. The recent incident of stealing the emails of scientists at the University of East Anglia shows that some would go to the extent of carrying out illegal acts, perhaps in an attempt to discredit the IPCC. But the panel has a record of transparent and objective assessment stretching over 21 years, performed by tens of thousands of dedicated scientists from all corners of the globe. I am proud to inform this conference that the findings of the AR4 are based on measurements made by many independent institutions worldwide that demonstrate significant changes on land, in the atmosphere, the oceans, and in the ice-covered areas of the Earth. The